Hello again. I had some more email correspondence from the illustrious Kate Ingalls of Northumbria Police regarding my complaint, which I've pasted into the description. And it's very much along the lines of what I've previously posted, what Ingalls, it's quite funny. We'd already been briefed on how they would try to deal with this, which if you follow the previous posts and videos, you'll see how Ingalls got very, very irritated when we tried to drill down on what she was trying to do and restrict the mandate of the complaint. Essentially, her latest emails are a replay of that. What they are desperately trying to avoid, and what she's told to avoid, of course, is the coordinated coercion that I've exposed and been talking about for a long while. And I can tell you on the day they forced their way into my property, terrorized my wife and stole our devices. The leading officer, Lloyd, I'm going to call him Officer Borodino. So Officer Borodino was very, very crude and clumsy, which was a real gift for me because I was able to, he was very leaky. And but it's before it even got to the station in Newcastle, the Björn, I'll call it, I already knew what they'd done. Because he was talking about campaigns of harassment. He was talking about timings of alleged vandalism and so on and so forth. And I already knew that essentially they'd use this pretext of vandalism, which has fallen away, as I've discussed in other emails. I refused to comply with the bail hearings because we'd already ascertained that they'd use a pretext to come in here, which was false. And then they accused me of the time machine, using the time machine to institute this vandalism. So I'd already knew it was false by the time I got there, and it's all fallen away since. The strange thing is there's a clear pattern from way back from 2023 when I sort of explained to the FCA we were looking at this corruption in the trading of children, in terms of the involvement of private equity in social services and the family courts and so on, and this trading model of children, which is vastly immoral. And I'd also said that there was some overlap, try and manage it, but there was some overlap between the work in identifying their catastrophic failings in wealth tech as well. And then as we started to dig deeper into this, the coercion started to become coordinated. And in the summer I'd sort of complained to the FCA, Richard Middleditch, about this. I'd also raised it again in October. In October, because of the abuse my wife and daughter were experiencing, I'd had enough. And if you look at the videos I posted at that time, it said that it was time to start stepping things up. And that's when a little after that they instituted this raid based on this false pretext. So there we are. So my email, I'll see they're fairly self-explanatory to Ingalls. What Ingalls is going to have been told to do is to avoid any issues with coordinated coercion and try to buy time and say, I can't comment on these things. Why you were in the line of questioning that somebody suggested that you reacted poorly to an email, used a time machine, went back and vandalized somebody's car. Acts of vandalism, we can't find any records of ever being investigated properly at the time, or the alleged time, all that sort of stuff. She'll say we can't do that because it's an ongoing investigation. So she's already been told what to do. But I'm keeping it on record so people can see it. But in terms of the coordinated coercion, it might be worth people And I sort of said to them, despite overwhelming evidence of it from, I've complained about coercion from the FCA, I've complained about coercion from Tyneside Council, the cultural genocide of our daughters' Polish heritage, and so on. There's already enough evidence there, and that's the point I'm making, for Northumbria Police to come to us and say, yes, we'd like to take statements from you and look into these very serious matters. But they can't do that because they're an instrument of that coordinated coercion, which is what this demonstrates, and what I've exposed by unpacking this pretext and so on and so forth. So we're playing this silly game. But in terms of the FCA, it might be worth reminding ourselves that as they pull in Palantir, system with handling intelligence, or data handler, there'll only be a data handler. If you believe that, you'll believe that the moon's made of cheese. All from my perspective, I'd ask the FCA to do is to take responsibility for their failings and to help those who had suffered as a result of that. And I said that I couldn't write witness statements that didn't reflect the full aspects, the full dimensions of the realities that had come to pass in the allegations made in the Wealth Tech scandal. And they wanted me to go along with this time zero, this manipulative narrative, where you could only comment on the FCA. You couldn't comment on the FCA prior to April 2023, i.e. you couldn't discuss how it's impossible to understand the allegations without understanding the catastrophic failings and weaknesses in the system. So that's where the coordinated coercion on that leg of it came from. But not surprisingly, Northumbria Police have not shown a willingness to discuss that, not shown the willingness to discuss from Tyneside Council when they've blackmailed us over standing up for our daughter's heritage. They block us off from seeing her like they've done now. Got recordings and so on and so forth, but they don't want to even discuss that. They don't want to discuss gross abuse of Officer Rachel Hudson. And we've got a lot more coming on that in terms of accepting unsigned, falsified evidence and the complicity of legal professionals in that. Might be worth doing. History can teach us quite a lot. And I think what we're seeing, I've touched on this in other videos, what we're seeing is a state, not just in Britain actually, Britain's certainly a prominent example of it. A state that has become, and you've seen this with Ingall's response in terms of there's no reality of the state being here to serve the people who fund it. And you're seeing a state that becomes self-serving, malign, and very, very parasitic. And I guess there's a few examples I would show for that. Would be if you look at the February borrowing figures that were released last week, and you've seen that I think the UK still had to borrow north of 14 billion in February, despite very, very substantial tax increases, and that was because spending isn't under control. The state is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. The parasite is demanding more and more and more from a private sector. There's nothing wrong with Britain's private sector. It has entrepreneurs and very, very good quality businesses. I meet hundreds of them a year. It's just, the private sector has an enormous, very malign parasite sucking all the value out of it, bleeding it dry. And you can see that. And a very interesting book, which it's the Ancien Regime and the French Revolution by de Tocqueville. And I'll read you a quote from this, because this looks at some of the reasons that led to the French Revolution. It doesn't charter the French Revolution. There are other books that do that. And I'm not predicting a French Revolution because I wouldn't want to see the bloodshed and so on. But you can see that when a state goes bad, it becomes ever more aggressive and arbitrary, and things like that don't change. And I'll read you a passage from it in regards to justice, actually. But there was no more dangerous precedent than the way criminal justice was administered when the common people were concerned. True, the poor man, again, excuse the term man, I don't mean to be misogynist, was much better protected than is generally thought against high-handed dealings on the part of richer or more influential members of the community. This is where it gets interesting. But if his adversary was the state, he came up, as mentioned in the previous chapter of this book, against, quotation marks, exceptional tribunals, biased judges, summary procedure, a mere semblance of a trial, and execution of judgment was enforced. But temporarily, there being no appeal against orders of these courts. And I think you can see exactly that's what we're seeing now. Very corrupt justice in a very, very corrupt state, and justice becoming more and more arbitrary. And that's why people really, really, really should fear the rolling back of jury trials and where ultimately that's going to go. And you see it also in terms of the quality of leadership we have is horrendous as well. You can see it with the Iran war, a war that never should have been started. I don't support the Iranian regime, and don't support any regime, but on 2 occasions they've been attacked whilst engaging in negotiations. And we've yet to see a doctrine where it says the United States has the right to remove leaders of a country and install those that they believe are more amenable. Just simply doesn't exist. In terms of Britain, you've seen how Starmer's botched it. He's tried to fake this narrative and saying it's defensive, the use of British debate bases and facilities for defensive actions. They're not defensive actions. They've led to deaths and destruction. Hence why I imagine the Iranians have targeted Diego Garcia unsuccessfully. I'm not defending that action, but I'm saying that's why, and why we're being misled with this phony defensive narrative. Governments that malign, governments that manipulate narrative and do not communicate with us in a well-meaning manner. That's it for now. Take care. Bye.